This is the LLCC. So I'm going to be talking today about the Indus Waters Treaty. And I think as with all classroom settings, show of hands, who knows anything about the Indus Waters Treaty? That's fine. But are you familiar with Pakistan and India as a treaty? There's something going on about it, and yeah, something about that. Right. Okay. So we're just going to get into it. Also, I'm really bad with these things. They always hang up on me. It's like fighting with a sibling over a remote. Right. Okay, so I want to start off by talking about the importance generally of water per se in this region. So this is a major staff report for the US Senate and authored by John Kerry for the most part. And part of it reads, dear colleagues, this report by the committee majority staff examines the US policy with respect to water scarcity and water management in Central and South Asia. Water plays an increasingly important role in our diplomatic and national security interests in the region. This is the point that I wanted to start off with, that it's more than just the environment, it's more than just sustenance, it's also now moved towards national security interests, diplomacy interests, and geostrategic importance. And so that's how I'd like to view. But then at the same time, you see news reports such as these. And this is all the way back in like 2013, 2015, that Pakistan may face 31% water shortage by 2025. To put that into context, that's 8 years away. That's not a lot. Biggest threat to Pakistan, and that Pakistan may run dry by 2025. Now that's a very scary notion to talk about. And that's why the Indus Waters Treaty and talking about this becomes all the more important in the context of not just geopolitics, but also the environment, also sustenance. And unless we as, okay, so are all of you like law students or lawyers? No. How many non-law people? Okay, that's brilliant. So it's one thing for like a lawyer to look at a treaty and then interpret it and see what it means. It's even better if non-law people know what it is and what it stands for. Because greater the awareness, greater the amount of influence we can then collectively exert on policy matters. Right? So from things as small as writing articles in newspapers to starting a video log, for example, I don't know, but anything and everything is a way forward. So I'm going to be talking about the Indus River system, what transboundary water courses are, the salient legal features of the IWT, division of the rivers, the dispute settlement mechanism, and more importantly, what the IWT does not cover. The contemporary challenges and eventually the way forward on this. So talking about the Indus River system, so everyone knows about Mohenjo-daro, Harappa is like the first thing they teach us in Indus Valley civilization. But this I thought was really interesting. Do you all have your course packs, by the way? Okay. You don't need to look at them right now, but it's the article that I've taken this from is actually in there. And this I thought was just amazing. The Indus with its 5 main tributary rivers comprises one of the great river systems of the world. Twice that of the Nile, 3 times that of Tigris and Euphrates combined. And 170 million acre feet, or later on you'll see MAF, which is the same thing. And enough water to submerge to a depth of 1 foot the whole area of France. I think that's pretty cool. Yes, it's just water and stuff. So this is a rough map of what the Indus River system looks like. Now if I zoom in, you'll see, okay, so when I was little, there was an anagram sort of thing that I used to remember them by, so it was in, jumped, cat, rat, stupid. Then I now realize that Beas is also a river. So I just say by at the end of it. That's how I remember it. But there's one thing I want you all to notice over here. So this is the boundary between Pakistan and India, right? Over here, the river kind of weaves in and out of Pakistan and back into India, back into Pakistan, back into India, until this point, where it eventually enters into Pakistan. So that's something to note, because see, usually when we think of this, we just think of a river's coming in from India, boundary, it flows right across. When in reality, the ground situation shows that it's not as simple or straightforward as that. So what do you do about the winding situation and whatnot? I'm not essentially going to cover that, but when you eventually look into the treaty, which I hope that you will, if I can generate enough interest, then hopefully you'll be able to see that. Now, the Indus River system was supposed to be Indus Valley civilization, originates in western China, in the Himalayas, 3,200 kilometers, 1.12 million square kilometers, and 47%, I'm bad at math, so I don't know how much that is, but 47% sounds a lot, falls in Pakistan. So the route it takes is China to India, to Kashmir, to GB, to KP, to Punjab, and then eventually Sindh, down to the Arabian Sea. Now, what are transboundary watercourses? They flow across a geographical border, much like you saw. They flow from an upper riparian to a lower riparian. So in this case, the upper riparian for the Indus River system would be? India. Okay, in relation between Pakistan and India, the upper riparian would be? India. And the lower riparian would be? Brilliant. Now there are 263 such watercourses in the world, and they make up almost 60% of the global freshwater flow. So they're generally really important. Now the Indus Waters Treaty in and of itself, before I get into it, I wanted to discuss a little bit about the context in terms of international law. Now I'm assuming that yesterday and earlier today you got like a few primer lectures on international law and sources of IL, right? So basically, these are your main sources of international law. You have treaties, customs, judicial decisions, academic writings, and international organizations. Now, when you look at treaties, the IWT is a treaty. It's a bilateral treaty. It's between two countries, right? Now you have the 1969 Helsinki Rules, which is a multilateral treaty, right? Then you have the 92 UN Convention and the 97 UN Convention. We're not going to get into them, that's just so that you're familiar with these things. That if tomorrow someone says, oh, do you know about the 97 Convention? Yeah, I do. You can show off. In terms of customs, how things develop, how the law is applied, state practice, opinion jurors. So you have India, Pakistan, you have India, China, you have India, Bangladesh, you have India, Nepal, and then you have African states, because the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, they're all African rivers, right? Now here's the interesting thing. Between India and Pakistan, we realized that India was the upper riparian. What do you think India is with reference to China?
No.
So do you think that for Pakistan, with regards to India as being the lower riparian, do you think India's state practice with relevance to China, where India is the lower riparian, is relevant?
Yes.
I think so too. Thank you. Okay, but then you have judicial. So how many of you know कि अच्छा बगलेहार का कुछ हुआ था? Have you heard the name Bagaihar?
Yes.
Okay. Have you heard the name Kishanganga?
Yes.
If you haven't, say no. Bagaihar.
No.
Okay, that's fine. So we're going to talk about those, but then there are also ICJ cases, so Hungary versus Slovakia, which, by the way, in the Kishanganga arbitration was also treated as customary international law. So that's an example of how case law can also evolve to become a custom. Then you have academic writings. So John Briscoe, he passed away, but one of his articles is in the course back, and that I think is a brilliant article. Raswamy Iyer is an Indian, so he counters John Briscoe's article, and I put the response in your course back as well, so you'll hopefully find that there. Then Andela Alam, Shafkat Kaka Khel, amazing work in Pakistan, and then our own Ahmed Bilal Sufi sir. I'm actually going to be stealing a few of his slides for my presentation, so copyright, it's for education purposes, so copyright is not infringed. Then you have international organizations, so ICJ, Permanent Court of Arbitration, and so on and so forth. So when did the IWT come about? Random guess. That's not a random guess. But yes, it came about in September 1960. How many of you know what retrospective effect means?
It means a thing has happened now. But if laws passed after 1 month,
then that law will not apply on the situation which happened 1 month ago.
Right, that's usually in terms of like how the criminal side takes it, but
No, retrospective, meaning what that means? That means the previous law.
right. So unlike what you're saying, the IWT became retrospectively effective from the 1st of April. So it was signed in September, उन्होंने कहा था कि it will apply as of April. So पहले से apply हो रहा था, right? And it was signed between Field Marshal Ayub Khan and Jawaharlal Nehru through the good offices of the World Bank. Now there's something I really want to clarify here. On the media and on the news, you must have heard कि जी World Bank एक party है IWT की और कि World Bank guarantor है. The World Bank's role for the IWT was as a mediator. It mediated the process between India and Pakistan. It brought them to the table. So the article Indus Waters Treaty by the World Bank, which is also in your course bank, talks about the World Bank's role. And I thought it was important to put it there because, again, informed discourse is always better. So at a glance, it has 12 articles and 8 detailed annexures. There's no expiry clause on this. It had a 10-year transition period. So basically, 1960, Pakistan was very nascent. We didn't have like a lot of money. We were pretty poor, and we needed enough time to be able to develop our own infrastructure. So that's what this 10-year transition period is. So until 1970, India was supposed to not do a certain number of things. Then we had a separate agreement whereby people sort of donated money so that we could build the few dams that we have today. And then it's a water apportionment treaty, not a water sharing treaty. What that means is that it divides the Indus River system into eastern and western rivers. Rather than saying that there are 6 rivers, हर river का 50% पानी India use करेगा, 50% Pakistan करेगा.
They separate the rivers.
Exactly. So 6 rivers, they went 3 and 3. And then the types of uses are also defined. So you have agricultural use, domestic use, non-consumptive use, and then generation of hydroelectric power. Now, there's something I want to point out. So, are you familiar? Have you heard Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. As per that, for any treaty, the annexures and the preamble are considered a part of the treaty itself. Because see, when you look at the Constitution of Pakistan, the preamble is not a substantive part. But in international law, for treaties and as far as they're concerned, the preamble as well as the annexures are a substantive part of the treaty that we're talking about. So this is just an overview of the articles. Eastern rivers, western rivers, finances, exchange of data, cooperation, settlement of differences, and then these are the annexures. And probably like most relevant to the contemporary situation are the generation of hydroelectric power, storage of waters, neutral expert court of arbitration, right? Annexure H is that for that transition period between 1960 and 1970, the 10-year period. So the preamble talks about the most complete and satisfactory utilization of the waters of the Indus River, of fixing and delimiting in a spirit of goodwill and friendship the rights and obligations of each in relation to the other concerning the use of these waters. Now it was signed by the Prime Minister of India and it was signed by the President of Pakistan. And in the same preamble, it says, having found both of these people, having found them in good and due form. One of the contentions that India recently raised was that the IWT is an invalid document. Why? Because the Prime Minister of Pakistan did not sign it, it's signed by the President, therefore it has no value. Except right there, having found them in good and due form. It's right there. Also, goodwill and friendship is another thing that we need to talk about. Because, are you familiar with the term, because lawyers for some reason use weird languages other than English. So, have you heard of malified?
Yes.
With bad intent, mischievous intent. So, that's also something that goes against the nature of the treaty, right? So, what about the division of the rivers? So, the IWT divides the Indus River system into western rivers and eastern rivers. Western rivers may you have Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, and you have Ravi, Sutlej, and Beas as the eastern rivers. Now, for western rivers, Pakistan is allowed unrestricted use once they flow into Pakistan completely. India can use them for domestic use, non-consumptive use, agricultural use, and generation of hydroelectric power. Right? The eastern rivers, unrestricted use by India, Pakistan can use the water after it has flown into Pakistan. So remember how I showed you Ravi Valley cheese? Actually, I'll get to that. So domestic use and non-consumptive use.
Not for the hydroelectric power.
We can't use the eastern rivers for hydroelectric generation. Also, realistically,
It's not feasible, is it?
realistically speaking, if India's used the eastern rivers like unrestricted, so much like what's happening nowadays, they're just running dry, which is a very big problem. So that's also something that I want to talk about later on. If there's something we can, that can be done about that.
What do you mean by non-consumptive?
I'm glad you asked. I'll get to that in the slide right afterwards. So this is again. So I brought up the slide again because see, from here onwards is where Pakistan can start using the eastern rivers, not this area, right? So when we're talking about the types of uses, agricultural use basically means irrigation. Domestic use is, ghar shahar ka istemal. Non-consumptive use is navigation, floating of timber, flood protection, fishing, wildlife, and other such purposes.
Does the water that is used for like nuclear power plants and all of that, like garage वगैरह के लिए, is that like not used or like?
Interesting.
For example, a nuclear power plant always needs a fresh water, like not a fresh water, but it needs a water source that is cool.
That be like industrial purposes?
वो भी किसमें आता है?
The industrial purposes, that's pretty like.
The first question is water for the nuclear plants taken from the rivers?
Yes. I mean, चश्मा जो है, चश्मा का barrage बना हुआ है, and then उस barrage में से पानी आता है.
It's an interesting goal.
कराची का भी, I'm pretty sure किसी.
I think it would fall in non-consumptive,
Okay.
the way I see it. Because you have four main goals.
Okay, just go अंदर से होके गर्म होके वापस आएगा.
That's also another thing. You need to return water that you take out. So I'm going to talk about, I'll think about that and I'll actually get back to you on that because I think it's a very interesting topic. So it's covered under Article 3 and Directive D and E. So India can only make run-of-the-river dams. Any idea what run-of-the-river dams are? Really?
I think.
Okay, go for it.
Well,
You're like the star pupil of the class that everyone hates.
Certainly not the star people, but I don't know about the hating part. Hopefully
No,
not.
please don't hate anyone. It's not good. Acha, how what are run-of-the-river dams?
So basically, they don't store the water, they use the flow of the river to generate electricity. So the turbines that are installed use the momentum of the water that's coming from the head to turn the wheels.
So they have no storage whatsoever?
I don't think there's a lot of storage. For example, Neelam Jena Power Project is one of the examples of run-of-the-river. It's not a dam, but it's like a run-of-the-river electricity generation.
Okay, he's right. So the total.
I'm disappointed.
It's always fun when someone who's that eager is sometimes wrong. Acha, now the one thing about run-of-the-river dams is that what if there isn't enough flow of water to make the turbines run? So there is a certain amount of storage that run-of-the-river dams have, but it's very limited and it's particularly just for the purpose of turning the turbines. So the total storage capacity for dams is restricted to 2.85 million acre-feet. So as per Annexure E, so this is general storage capacity, which says it can be used for any purpose whatsoever. And this is power storage capacity, and this is 2.85. Now another thing that I want to clarify is that the news, for example, reported this as 3.6 because they added this, which is flood storage capacity. Flood storage capacity cannot be used for hydroelectric power generation. So there's a gap at 2.85, but now what you're going to eventually realize is that at no point does the IWD say, okay, but you can only make an X number of dams. It just says, this is the amount of storage that you can use up. So for instance, say they can use 100 MAF, right?
Is that per dam or is that in
Total.
cumulative?
Cumulative. So assume that you have 100. So maybe you can make 10 dams of 10. You can make 50 dams of 2. You can make 2 dams of 50. There's no cap on the number of dams, which is the problem that Pakistan is now facing. Because India will claim, so long as we're under the 2.85 limit, we're good. So what do you do about it? So this is like, my primitive concept of a run-of-the-river dam. I like to think of it as like the pani ki tanki jo hoti hai in our homes. So water comes in, water goes out into your taps, right? It stores just for the time when water isn't coming from the main supply. But otherwise, there's like a complete flow of water. It keeps going in and coming out. But every, after a certain period of time, you need to get the water tank cleaned because there are deposits at the bottom. And the lowest tap in your tank is such that there's still a little, like, 6 inches, 8 inches below that you can't really get out. So, koi andar ghusta hai balti leke aur phir nikal raha hota hai. That's just how it happens. Unless Islamabad is different, I'm sorry. But in terms of, this is important because this thing in orange is called the dead storage level. It's the, dead storage. It's dead, it's staying there. And this generally is called the pondage level, right? So probably up until this point is going to be the pondage level. These are two terms that I want you to get slightly comfortable with because we're going to be talking about these later on as well. So dispute settlement mechanism this I thought was very interesting. If the wars of this century were fought over oil, the wars of the next century will be fought over water. No. So, okay, let's assume that you have friends, we all have siblings and friends, we don't all have siblings, but we have friends, I hope. So in that, usually how does, when you have an argument with a friend, how does it progress? Think of it in those terms. Break everything down to very simple, understandable concepts and they become easier to understand. So, at first point you're going to, be like, did you do this? Are you sure you didn't do this? No, I didn't do this, wherever that this is, wherever. Then it's going to be, no, but I think you did it, I'm going to go tell on you. And then someone else to teacher, he did this. And then the teacher comes in, no, I didn't do this, whatever. And then they just fight it out, right? So the first step is a question, the second step is a difference, and the third step is a dispute. That's how I look at it. Now, the dispute settlement mechanism, the IWT in Article 9 sort of divides it as such. So if you have a question, you go to the Permanent Indus Commission. If you have a difference, you get a neutral expert appointed. And then if you have a dispute, you go to the Court of Arbitration. That's the hierarchy of disputes. So first you go to the PIC, if it doesn't get resolved, you go to the neutral expert, and if it's a dispute, then you leave the neutral expert, you go to the Court of Arbitration. Does that, if you all get that? If not, I can... Someone else raised their hand. Fine.
What kind of body is this PIC? Is this staffed by international experts or like staff from the staff?
I was really getting ahead of my presentation. I preempted that. Okay, so this is established.
You went in my head.
I hope not. So it was established under Article 8. So what it comprises is two commissioners. So Pakistan's Indus Water Commissioner and India's Indus Water Commissioner. Now, the commissioner is a high-ranking engineer. Again, notice the person is not a lawyer. And when you go through the World Bank article, you realize that the people who were responsible for drafting the treaty were not lawyers. They were engineers. Who has an expertise in hydrology and water use. Now, this person is the representative of the government for IWT matters and the first stop for dispute settlement. Now, the Permanent Indus Commission has to meet at least once a year. Now, if you go back to the recent thing with the whole India thing, they said we're not going to have the PIC meetings, which is also, as we consider, a violation of the treaty because we're supposed to do it. And what exactly is their purpose? The purpose and function of the Commission should be to establish and maintain cooperative arrangements for the implementation of this treaty and to promote cooperation between the parties in the development of the waters of the rivers. Right? So cooperation, development, that's their job, as well as monitoring exchange of data, by the way. This is the current Commissioner for Indus Waters from our side. So this is one half of the PIC. He's not a scary in person, by the way, I promise. He offered me chai and biscuits, but that's also because he's a government office. Okay, so the Baglihar difference we took to the neutral expert. It was based on India proceeding to build 450 megawatt Baglihar dam on Chenab. Now Chenab is a western zone. So we would like to at least have some water to be able to build our own hydroelectric projects on those. Except, of course, India is not banned from using it. So India can also generate hydroelectric power. But there needs to be a balance maintained so that there is enough flow of water for us to proceed with our intentions and plans, right? So Pakistan approached the World Bank to appoint a neutral expert in 2005. Raymond Lafitte from Switzerland was appointed as the neutral expert. And one of the things that stands out for me in his determination was that these rights and obligations should be read in the light of new technical norms and new standards as provided for by the treaty. Because it's a treaty from 1960. The world's moved on. We have computers now. Let's put that into perspective. So the basic determination, this is like a lot of engineering jargon that I don't expect you to get, but you might understand this just a bit. So peak discharge, same gated spillways, forget about those, height of gated spillway, lowered the height of freeboard above full pondage level, increase the height of the deck storage level, raise the intake level. Now, okay, one question. If you increase the height of the deck storage level, what happens?
The water will be less, yeah.
Water will be?
The storage of water will be less because the deposit, the deck deposit,
No,
will be taking more space.
think of the deck storage level as the point jab in nichla nal ka laga rahe ho. So if you raise that from 6 inches to say 8 inches, that means there's more water at the bottom that you can't get out. That also means that if you were to clear the dam of sedimentation and you just open the gated spillways, right? And you let all that dead storage water flow out, there's going to be more of it, which means that it could cause more damage. And someone said floods, which would be the eventual consequence that you would face. So that's a problem for us. Now, for Kishanganga, we filed a request for arbitration in 2010. It was based on the diversions of water from Kishanganga for the construction of Kishanganga hydroelectric project. So what we basically argued was that if there's a river coming, you can't take water out of it, build a dam, and then put it back. But India was saying, no, we're going to put it wherever. And if you're interested, there's a Lake Lannou arbitration in France that sort of parallels this. So that's like a nice case law to look at if you want to. So the court was headed by the guy with a very weird last name. And so the award eventually was that India is allowed to divert the waters, but must maintain a minimum flow below that hydroelectric project into Pakistan. And that was a big thing for Pakistan, because before this there were no safeguards as to the amount of water that India needs to let flow into Pakistan. Now the problem is that the minimum flow was set at 9 cumecs. That's great, except we need more than that. Now the problem is at the time, we couldn't substantiate a greater need because we hadn't started building the Neelam Jail. Had we started, we weren't in a position to start at that point. But that's also something because you had to show kya ki usage kitni.
Can't you point out the future need as?
They don't care.
I mean, so you're supposed to start building a project like next year, and this is being negotiated right now, so you cannot.
So it's current use. Which also, by the way, means that they don't care if your population increases. So India may not employ drawdown flushing of the reservoir so as to deplete the reservoir below dead storage level. This was also another great thing for us. Because this means, what I just talked about earlier, gated spillways calling in, they're going to let the water flow out, and oops, that's not going to happen.
कैसे हैं आप लोग?
Would you like to?
No.
So that was also a very good safeguard that we got from the Kishanganga arbitration. Now, as I pointed out earlier, just as important as it is to understand what the IWP is about, it's also important to understand what it does not cover. So what it doesn't cover, first of all, is climate change. So you have melting of glaciers, for example. It's not covered. pollution, environmental degradation. Apart from one clause in there, which is Article 7 or Article 8 in its clause number 10, apart from that, there's no mention of it. Safeguards for environmental and minimum flows, and the minimum flow safeguard only came about through the arbitration. It's not in the treaty in and of itself. And like I said, there's no provision for an increase in population. So